Hi, everyone. So this is Boaz Hepner, vaccine educator over at St. John's Health Center and full-time med-surg RN. I wanted to record a video because I'm getting phone calls and emails and text messages almost every day over the last 3 or 4 weeks from people asking questions about whether or not they should get a second booster, but mostly recently about people testing positive for COVID. For some people, it's their first time. For some people, it's their second time. Some people, it's their third time. People are vaccinated or they're they're boosted, or they're not boosted, or they're not vaccinated. So I'm getting a lot of questions that have to do with, and people follow, unfortunately, practices that are impossible to know what to do, because guess what? As we've had problems since this started, in both administrations, the health agencies and the media do not report things in a very clear way so you can really know what to do. And that starts with when to test and how to test properly. So avoiding all political things, including recommendations of isolation, I'm going to give you the facts of what I would do for my family and what I think is best practice per the wonderful infectious disease physicians and epidemiologists that I have the pleasure of talking to. Okay, let's just start with simply, you think you might have COVID and you want to get tested. So try your best. If you suddenly come down in symptoms out of the blue, sometime, and all of a sudden you just feel your usual cold symptoms starting, try not to get tested immediately. Try to avoid people in this time because you certainly might have COVID, and you might have many other things as well. I think RSV is going around at the moment as well. So what you want to do, if you can, is wait ideally 48 hours until after your symptoms start, at least 24 hours after symptoms begin. Why is this? Because your initial symptoms might have some of the virus in you. You might actually have COVID, but in order to test positive from your rapid test, from your antigen test, you need to have a pretty good high amount of viral load. In the beginning, it's just building up. So ideal timing is 48 hours after symptoms started. You can do it as soon as 24 hours afterwards, but if you have a negative test after 24 hours and you're still sick, I would still test yourself again a day later. You'll often find the negative test at the 24-hour mark and positive after 48 hours. In that period of time, please be careful around other people, a mask, stay away from people, quarantine, whatever you want to call it in that time. And it certainly might not be COVID. Remember that most rapid tests are antigen tests. Antigen tests are checking in real time how much virus you have in you. We often see that the peak viral load for most of the virus that's been going on for the last 6 months or so, Omicron and so on, is often around day 6, day 7. So without getting too much into the politicking of it all, you can read between the lines and imagine most people in the know are not big fans of the whole, end isolation after 5-day rule, because it doesn't make that much logical sense most of the time. So if you can, let's talk about how you can test more easily, more often. Did you know, hot tip, you can be getting 8 free rapid antigen tests for COVID a month per person in your insurance plan. I believe that people who have Medicare and Medi-Cal are out of luck and this does not apply to them, and they just have to go to the usual testing facilities, which are still free. Unless you go to a scammy private place, most of them are still free. But for the rest of people who are usually under some sort of a PPO, maybe they have Kaiser or whatever it might be, for the rest of us, we get 8 free tests per person in your household a month. So it's really, really easy. You could, through Walgreens, you pay for them and get them reimbursed. CVS makes it even easier. CVS just looks at your insurance and they just see, okay, you're qualified. And as long as they have it in stock, however many people in your household, they'll process it. So if you have a 4-person household, right there, that's 32, right? 8 times 4, right? 32 tests that you can get a month for free. That'll just take up space in there. So it's wonderful if you're able to preempt this. And anybody watching this who isn't in crisis in the middle of COVID in their house, you should still do this. It would be great to just have a bunch of tests waiting for you, because once you do have COVID or might have COVID, you're going to start using a lot of tests, especially if there's a lot of family members. And I'm going to explain. So try to get these tests. and you can get them for free for your house. That's number one. Number two, you're going to, as I say, you have symptoms, wait 48 hours, test yourself. If you didn't have symptoms and you're just trying to know about an exposure, right? So let's say a friend of mine today called up and he tested positive. His mother has been exposed to him each of the last few days. She lives somewhere else, but been seeing her every day. What's the best practice for her? Well, easy. They're a different household. She should stop seeing him, right, for the time being, certainly. She might have COVID. So the best practice for her is that 4 days from the last exposure, 4 days from today, so if today's Sunday, that would be Thursday, she should get a PCR test. A PCR test is definitively, very accurately, yes, there is always going to be some lab errors, there's going to be some false negatives, but PCRs you can rely on pretty well if you test yourself 4 days after when you think you might have gotten it. You know, you decided to not wear a mask at a massive concert with 5,000 people, might not be the worst idea to test yourself with a PCR 4 days later. But that's if you don't have symptoms. As I say, if suddenly you just wake up with symptoms, I gave you the advice of what to do, and that would be the antigen test 48 hours later. And sure, PCR as well is great. You can trust the positive tests. If you get one of those home tests and you actually test positive, if you're getting the FDA approved proper ones that they'll give you at CVS, Rite Aid, and Kaiser, and so on, it's like 1 in 200, 250 false positives. It's very unusual. It's not crazy rare, but you can generally rely on them happening and being true. So let's say you now have COVID and you want to know your next step of what can I do now that I have COVID? So here's step 2. Well, step 2 is if you don't already have a lot of tests, start getting on it, call your pharmacy and get them to give you your 8 free ones a month. Sometimes in some of your insurance plans, you're going to need a doctor to prescribe them first. Fine, call your doctor and say, hey, for each member of my household, please, can you send a prescription over for 8 FDA approved home rapid tests? Not hard for the doctor to send that over electronically to your CVS, and they'll take care of it from there. And they might not even need to. Start by calling your CVS and seeing if they could do it for you from the pharmacy. If they can't, deal with your doctor. Okay, the next thing you can do. Now here is something that's a little bit controversial, because I'm giving you advice I would give my family, and I'm not necessarily always based on what's publicly out there. There is an actual, aside from this great vaccine, which works, not so greatly to prevent it right now, somewhat, but certainly to lower the severity, and the booster being very important. I'm going to sidebar for a minute, even though this is a bit of a tangent. I want to sidebar and just say, in my humble opinion, and in most people that I speak to who I trust humble opinions, this is a 3-shot series. You don't get, I know they were calling it a 2-shot series as they was going, and it was great, those 2 shots, but we learned how much more protection you get from that 3rd shot. So whether it was Pfizer or it was Moderna, it's really, 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 really important to get that first booster. We'll get to the second booster later, but that first booster doesn't just give you more, which always wane. Of course, it goes up, it dips, it goes up and down, but it makes the quality of your fight against the antibodies smarter. It actually changes your antibodies into being smarter antibodies that will be better at adapting to these variants. So that first booster is so important. I honestly believe that they should change the terminology of fully vaccinated. I think for a long time we've known that it's kind of semi-silly to say that you're fully vaccinated without a booster. I don't think you need to, beyond that, say that you need 1 million boosters, but that 1 booster I don't think should even be called a booster. I think it should be a 3-shot series. First shot, second shot, and then however many minutes later you get your 3rd shot. Back to what the advice is about once you have COVID. So now you're trying to get those extra tests in your house. What else can you do? Well, did you know, and you probably do, that there's actually a medication that helps kind of cure it. It doesn't necessarily cure it, but it stops it from getting worse. And that's a hell of a cure. So that's a Pfizer medication called Paxlovid, Paxlovid, Paxlovid. You want to get out of a global pandemic? We have all the tools we need to do it. We really should be out of a global pandemic, and arguably we are, right? Step 1 is get a vaccine. You can help prevent or, help fight things in advance. Step two is to get an actual medication for it afterwards. We have those things. Now, unfortunately, they've only really have this Paxlovid, and it says it's for people who are highly or moderately or severely at risk. But technically, letter of the law, that's just more recommendation. Like, it still can be prescribed for anybody, but they just don't put it out there as something. So it happens. So it ends up being that almost nobody ends up getting this prescribed, including so many people who are at risk. All the elderly people who get COVID should be getting it right away. And certainly anybody who is immunocompromised besides that. In my opinion, from my understanding, there are so much of this on the shelves, just like the vaccine, that it is not going anywhere. We are not taking it away from people who need it more from us. And you don't know if you're going to be a case that needs it more. And this is an actual medication. Hey, you have a bad fever, take Tylenol, it's there. You got COVID, get this medication prescribed for you. But you do need a prescription for it. Now, here's how it works. For the first 5 days, of you having the virus, your virus is replicating. You get more and more and more and more virus in you. As you can imagine, the more virus you have, the more it can be hard for your body to fight it. Your virus is replicating. The way Paxlovid works is it literally goes to the enzyme which causes the viral replication, and it stops the enzyme. No more. So now the virus can't replicate anymore. Doesn't that sound great? Suddenly your virus will stop, and instead of it being, tons more the next day, it won't be more, and your body can have a chance to catch up with it and fight it, whether you're vaccinated or not, whether you have relying on 2 shots or 1 shot or 3 shots or 4 shots, or just your natural immunity from having COVID, whatever it may be, give your body a chance to fight it, right? So it's what I honestly think, it's going to be up to your doctor, but you can just talk to your doctor and say, hey, would you mind prescribing me this Paxlovid? I would feel better if you would do it. But this only works in the first 5 days, because after those 5 days, the medicine won't work, because after those 5 days, the virus really isn't replicating anymore. And if it is, then I apologize for the misunderstanding, but you cannot get the medication after the first 5 days. It will only work in that time. So if you get it on day 5, it will still work, but it'll work less than if you get it on day 4, less than day 3. The earlier you start the medication, the better off it'll be, because it'll stop the virus from replicating, and it has tremendously good effects. So you're talking about somebody who is able to take that medicine. It's a huge difference. A lot of lives could be saved for people taking the medicine. I mean, all these elderly people who are the majority of people who really need it are not getting it prescribed enough, but even younger people should, in my opinion. So get more home tests prescribed to you, and get your free 8 tests a month, and get the Paxlovid prescribed if you want to. Listen, if you're a young person who's had your 3 shots and you're feeling fine, and you don't want to get the Paxlovid, that's fine. I'm not telling anybody to try to override it. I'm just saying I wouldn't judge you personally if you do. Certainly, if you're over 50, please do it. Certainly, if you have any immunocompromise, do it. Now, let's move on to the next part of this equation. What to do in terms of how do I end my isolation? When should I end isolation? I've heard something about 5 days, 10 days. Should I take another test? So I'm going to tell you right now, don't take another PCR. Once you've tested positive and you're starting your whole however long it is to get through the COVID, don't waste your time on another PCR test, because your PCR test is very reliable at seeing forensically if you had COVID in the near past. But it will continue testing positive for up to 40 days or so, certainly easily for about 20 days or so. So what's the point on day 9 or 10 for you to take another PCR test to see if you still have COVID? It's almost certainly going to still say, yes, you do, but that doesn't actually mean you still do, or that you're contagious. So forget about the PCR, great for initial diagnosis, especially if it's just based on exposure. Then stop once you have your positive diagnosis. Here's my advice to people testing positive. After 5 days, and not before 5 days, if you are fortunate enough to now have no symptoms at all after the 5-day mark, feel free, especially if you have an abundance of rapid tests in your house, here's where it comes in handy, to say, hey, I'm going to see if I'm still seem like I'm contagious. Because what is the rapid test being positive telling you at any given point? It's showing you have a high viral load and are thus contagious. You actively have the disease in you and you're contagious, the virus. So sure, it's day 6, you have no symptoms. I don't mind. take the rapid test. If the rapid test happens to now be negative, awesome. I would still do a second test to be sure that it wasn't a false negative, because that's really soon. But if you get 2 negative tests with no symptoms anytime after day 5, end your isolation. Go ahead and start breathing on everybody again. I'm fine with that. Now, assuming you still have symptoms, even if it's just like a minor, it feels like a cold, but assuming you still continue to have your COVID symptoms, don't bother taking another COVID test on day 5 or 6 or 7. It's going to be positive. When you finally get to day 10, the time that they basically tell you, oh, the egg timer ended, you can just end your isolation regardless. Here's where, again, I don't advise that, because it's intellectually dishonest to say just because it's 10 days, it's over. I know multiple people where it's taken them to anywhere from day 11 to day 13 when they actually stopped being contagious. So again, day 10 comes, you still have some symptoms, that's fine. You might still have cold symptoms for a while when you're not contagious, and it's totally fine. So day 10 comes, you now feel free to take one of those rapid antigen tests, test yourself. If it comes out negative, beautiful, you can end your isolation just like they say. If on the other hand, on day 10, as I've seen many times before, that it's still a positive test, I'm sorry to tell you, but it means that you still are contagious. You still have the antigen actively in you. You still have the virus actively in you. So what I would tell you at that point is that when you're about to not be negative anymore, you're going to have a test where it's a faint line, right? These are solid lines. So let's just say day 10, you took a test and it was a solid line. You still had your symptoms. You're welcome to take a new test every day. I'd probably skip a day now, because if it's a solid day today, tomorrow is probably going to be at least a faint line. Even a faint line means you still have it actively in you. So day 10, let's just say it's a positive line, it's thick. Okay, I'm probably checking again at day 12, 2 days later. Hopefully now it's 0, end isolation. If on day 12 now I'm checking it and it's a little faint line, I'm like, I'm going to wait one more day. I'm going to test it the next day and it's probably negative. But usually you'll be able to be finished at around the 10-day mark. But I just wanted to let you know, it's not an exact science. It's not an exact science for that, because we're all different depending on how well our body was fighting it, right? How well our body was fighting it, of the fight in us. Also, our day 1s are not all the same. They're not all created equal. One person's day 1 or day 0 is because they just tested positive without symptoms on a PCR. That's your day 0, by the way. The day you have no symptoms and you take a test, because a lot of people get confused. What's my day 0 and 1? Your day 0, if you had no symptoms, was the day you tested positive on a test. End of story. But people who have symptoms and get test positive, your day 0 is the day your symptoms started. So let's just say your symptoms start today, and then people are like, I tested negative 3 days in a row, and finally on day 4, I tested positive, and all those days I was symptomatic. Great, you have COVID. Your first day of symptoms, even though those were negative tests, it was too early, that was your actual day 0. So I hope that helps you keep track of how to count, because everybody's count is a little bit confused. Even I've been confused about that a lot over time. So I've told you about the 8 free tests a month per person per family you can get. I will warn you, sometimes they run out though at the pharmacies. I've told you about the best timing for testing beforehand and also after. I've told you about the Paxlovid prescriptions. Okay, take a breath. And now, and I will say, I'm sure you will be okay following these practices. It's still very, very unusual for somebody to have a terrible outcome with COVID, but of course it happens around us all the time. And yes, it happens with vaccinated people as well. And it happens with boosted people as well. Now, in terms of boosters, let's get to that. There was stuff in the news recently saying, oh, it's catching up with us, the numbers, the people who are vaccinated dying versus the people not. Yeah, it's true. Like based on current things, I think, currently it's something like 40% of the people who are dying currently are being vaccinated and 60% unvaccinated. Okay, well, so people are starting to think, oh, what's the point of vaccination? I'm not going to create an entire new lecture explaining the benefits of vaccination, but let's just be intellectually honest for a second and remember that more than half of the country is fully vaccinated. I believe it's like 65% or so, and it's even higher that's partially vaccinated, and any amount of vaccine is better than nothing. All right, so you've got the majority of the number of people, and I'm not a mathematician, so I don't want to get lost in numbers, but most people have some or all vaccine or most vaccine in them. But now you have to remember that only something like half the people have been boosted. I believe it's something like, if you actually look at how many of the people who are dying right now are vaccinated and boosted, it's only about, if I recall, 13% is what it is. I'm pretty sure I'm correct on those numbers. So what we're seeing is that, sure enough, the more vaccine you have, the more likely you're going to have a good outcome. So please, if you haven't gotten your first booster, please get that, because I implore you, I'm telling you, if you believe in vaccine, but you're just annoyed about the idea of booster, I am telling you that first booster really shouldn't be thought of as a booster. And it makes a huge difference in terms of fighting it, in terms of making your memory cells smarter. Every time you get to your peak with your booster, with your initial vaccine, you do wane 6% a month. That's how much immunity you lose a month, 6% a month. So no matter what happens, we're always going to wane. We're always going to lose some of our immunity. We're going to lose our fight. This happens every year with our flu shot. Every year we get a flu shot, our immunity wanes. We have really good protection against the flu for about 3 months or so, and then it starts to wane. But again, the majority of vaccines do not just protect you from getting that virus or bacteria. The majority of vaccines, whether it's a flu shot and whether it's a COVID shot, the majority of them are not the ones that are like polio, or you're not going to get polio now, or smallpox, whatever it may be. The majority of them will lower your chances from getting it a certain percentage, might be 20%, 60%, but they will get you, your fight will be a much better fight once you actually catch it. You'll have a lesser case of the flu, and so on and so forth. So I do implore people to get the first booster and not even think of it as a booster. If it has been 4 months since your third shot, and you're wondering about if you should get a fourth shot, it's currently only eligible to people 50 or older. It's eligible to people who are immunocompromised. It's a self-attestation thing. So anybody who goes there and says, I am immunocompromised, will get the shot. And if you're over 50, you will get that fourth shot. If it has been 4 months, I recommend it if you qualify. Why do I recommend it? Because right now there's a lot of virus around you. So this would be a good time to say, hey, there's a lot of virus around me all over the place. I should probably, my immunity is going down 6% a month. This is a good time to get it to as strong as I can for over the next number of months. And each time you get it, it'll go up, and it'll also make your antibodies a little bit smarter as well, which will be nice. What's really important is for them to create, and they should very soon, is to finally create a new strain of the vaccine, like we do every year for the flu shot. Every year our flu shot is updated, and they try to target something so we get different strains of the flu. There's two. So it's really important that they update this, and they will. Both Moderna and Pfizer, hopefully this fall, will come out with ones which should be updated, hopefully for Omicron and Delta, and basically be not just the original one. The original one works great at helping us somewhat and helping us protect us somewhat and so on. But hey, it's kind of time for it to be adjusted to one that is actually to the strains that are out there, and that'll work even better. As soon as that comes out, I encourage everybody to get it. I hope that they will get the funding so it'll be available to everybody. I'm nervous that they will not make that available to everyone when it happens. I also encourage everybody to vaccinate whatever age group children they have, but I'm not going to get into all of that here. But people who have questions about that, and oh my goodness, why should a child need such a thing? You can either watch my full lecture for that or contact me about that. I'm looking forward to the final age group being available, which is under 5-year-olds, hopefully in the next couple of months. Again, if you have questions why a child should even need it, you're welcome to just reach out to me or to watch my previous lecture. Now, let's also talk about, let's also just mention a couple of other things that have nothing to do with COVID. Vaccines are great. Vaccines are wonderful. So you want to know something? You should be up to date on your tetanus. Well, that's something people get every 10 years, but tetanus is actually part of something that you've heard of, or most of you have heard of, called TDAP, tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. Pertussis is whooping cough. Whooping cough is something that really, truly is just something dangerous for babies. We don't care about whooping cough. If I got whooping cough, it would be a very minor cold, most likely. But we still care about it enough to protect babies. So therefore, we get it as part of our tetanus shot, as part of TDAP. Why do I mention this? Because guess what? If you want to be intellectually honest, even though tetanus lasts 10 years, your pertussis vaccine actually starts to wear off after 3 years. So I actually recommend, after having spoken to pediatricians, that you can actually go into your CVS or Walgreens and get your TDAP instead of waiting for 10 years when they'll tell you it's expired. I would actually do it at around the 5-year mark when like the pertussis has waned enough that you'd like to be able to be fully protected on the TD and on the T, the D, and the P in the TDAP, right? So that's something you're not going to hear every day. I learned that, my wife and I learned that when our daughter was born prematurely from our pediatrician, who was basically telling us, I strongly recommend you don't have any friends or family come near the baby, hold the baby, who are not up to date on their TDAP, specifically within about 5 years. And that's how I learned about that. Another little hot tip to tell you, these are things you can get now just in your pharmacy without a doctor's order. I went last week to CVS and I said, what are your latest with your vaccines? I'm not an expert in vaccines. I'm an expert in COVID vaccines. I want to make that clear. And so I said, what's the deal with your current pneumonia vaccines? Well, they actually a few months ago just updated it to a new, they've had for years 2 pneumonia vaccines that each one is for different strains of pneumonia, and it covers you, it blasts you, so you have lots of strains of pneumonia covered. This is something that I believe is generally available for people over the age of 50, or again, as we often hear, immunocompromised. Well, I have something called an immunoglobulin type A deficiency. I qualify enough. Doctors said, that's a good idea, Boaz. I'm a little bit at risk. So I've gotten the pneumonia vaccines. My wife has ulcerative colitis. That's an inflammatory disorder. It's an autoimmune. She's gotten it from my parents and so on. The 2 vaccines that have been there for years, there's Pneumovax 23. So that one, it says pneumococcal Pneumovax 23. That's what it sounds like. It's a pneumonia vaccine that covers 23 strains. If you've never gotten it before and you qualify, or you think you qualify, go to a CVS, a Walgreens, go ahead and get it. And you just have to tell them that you're 50 or that you have, immunocompromise. That'll cover you for 23 strains. If you've gotten that, you now should wait about a year before getting the other one. What's the new thing? I mentioned to you something is new. There was a second one called Prevnar 13. Prevnar 13 covered 13 more strains of pneumonia. Well, they've actually been working on getting an updated one, and they finally did. So Prevnar 13 is gone. And now they've updated it with Prevnar 20. So now we have Pneumovax 23, which already was around, and now we have Prevnar 20. So between those two, that's 43 strains of pneumonia that you could be highly protected from. And you should certainly make sure that your loved ones who are elderly or immunosuppressed have gotten these. My recommendation to everybody watching this is almost none of you, even if you're up to date on almost everything, almost none of you have gotten Prevnar 20. It just came out about 3 months ago, as CVS was just telling me. So they said there's no wait in terms of when you got your last one to get this. So what I'm saying to you is, if you think you qualify or you know you qualify for any type of pneumonia vaccine, and even if you've gotten them before, go ahead and update it. As I did last week, and I got a shot in my arm of Prevnar 20, you'll be able to update all 20 of those strains. That's new. And the last thing I'm going to mention, I had a conversation with my doctor, and I had a conversation with the pharmacist at the CVS, and I was asking questions about the HPV vaccine. Yes, I'm going to talk about HPV vaccine. HPV is something that men generally don't care about. Why? Because we almost never get affected by it. We are carriers of it. We can give it to other people, but ultimately it's the women who are actually at risk. Because if a woman gets HPV, a woman is at risk for cancer, which is why for years, thank God, there's been a vaccine for HPV and it's been given to young women. And that's wonderful. And it's been proven safe. And the usual anti-vax things came out about it saying, oh, and it can cause fertility problems and so on. It's all been disproven. It's a safe vaccine. And so it's given to young women. Hopefully it should be given to any woman before she starts having sex, because that's what you want to prevent them getting HPV. But then they later said, hey, we could actually give this to men. And they had the age being men up to the age of 29. So men can't get it and men can't transmit it. But what I found out just last week is that they actually upped the age a few years ago, I think, for men, that we could get it up till age 45. And that's great, because I said, hey, I'm 42. This is a vaccine that I didn't qualify for before, and now I did. Do I need this vaccine? Well, no, it's not going to affect me personally. I'm not planning on cheating on my wife. We have a monogamous, Jewish monogamous relationship. So, you could argue certainly very fairly, what do I need it for? Because neither of us are going to give it to one another. But, if I'm going to think about this fairly, I'm going to say, you know what, this is something for the rest of my life. I take this vaccine. I shouldn't be able to ever get and give to somebody. You don't want to think about these things, but one day somebody outlives somebody else in their marriage, right? And then one day you could be with other people. So why should you put yourself in a position where when you're in your 70s, you can be passing along something that can cause cancer to somebody else? I'm not saying this is something everybody has to run out and do, but I'm just saying, is there really much of a downside to it? It really just hurts for a second. With these vaccines like pneumonia shots and these HPV shots, there's really, really rarely anything other than your arm hurting. It's not like COVID where, yeah, you have a crappy couple of days, but it's worth it. You don't get a crappy couple of days. So I had them give me my first HPV shot last week on one arm and my Prevnar 20 pneumonia shot in the other arm. And just so you know, the HPV shot is a 3-shot series. I'll be getting my second shot in 2 months, my third shot 6 months after that. It's just something I'm putting out there. And if you're under the age of, if you're anything from 45 and under as a man, hey, why don't you just go and get that so you never have to think about being able to be a carrier in the future, hopefully. You're always welcome to contact me with any questions. I hope this was something that was watchable, not too long and not too tangential. And I hope that it was able to answer most questions when it comes to what to do right now. As always, please be respectful of one another, whether or not your friends and family members have been vaccinated or not. We all are in this together, and we are always going to be, and I am always non-judgmentally here, able to answer any questions for people, no matter what anybody's opinions are. I just want to be able to help based on the science. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.